Going on your first RV trip, we're going to share with you how not to go on your first RV trip.
And Mercedes gave herself food poisoning, guys.
You had to go there.
Welcome back to the RV Odd Couple. My name is John.
And I'm Mercedes. We RV in pursuit of freedom, independence, and adventure.
Because life is so short, guys.
It is. And in this video, we're going to share about our maiden voyage in our new RV named
Piper.
The RV Odd Squad voted. That's our subscribers. They voted, and you guys picked the name, and so Piper it is.
So thank God this was not our first maiden voyage, right? We've got a year of experience under our belt because we had to travel 1,250 miles. We were up against winter, so we wanted to get as far south as we could, as quick as we could. And it was over Christmas, and we were up against a doctor's appointment for Sage that we could not reschedule.
And I poisoned myself, giving myself food poisoning.
Remember those burritos, guys?
So here's the story of how not to do your first RV trip. First and foremost, don't make your first RV trip cross-country and don't do it in the winter.
Yeah, when you're buying a new RV, especially if you're a newbie, you want to get that RV as close to the dealership that you take it from or the third party. Best place is to actually get used to your RV at where you're living, right? In your front yard or your backyard. But if you can't do that, go ahead and get hookups at a local campground that's pretty close to where you pick it up. You're going to want to take the time to familiarize yourself with your rig. Every rig is different. It is so important when you're setting out into this lifestyle, especially if you talk your wife into trying this out.
Or husband.
That your first experience is a really, really good experience. So you want to keep it close to home. You don't want it to be a nightmare because if you talked your partner into doing this lifestyle, and in my case, Mercedes had never even camped before in her life, right?
Well,
so
I stayed in a car once. I'm tough.
But you really want that experience, your first experience, to be a good one.
The very first time we took our very first RV, Sandy, back in 2018, we were smart. We had a short maiden voyage. It was in Punta Gorda, and we were 40 minutes away from our home in Venice. So it was like perfect, right in the middle, very comfortable. If you're new especially, do something like that. Plan a location that's really close. Don't set yourself up for, oh, let's go cross country, my very first time driving an RV. If this had been our first time, I don't know what... I don't think we'd be full-timers.
It would have been a nightmare, right? Because one of the things that's really interesting about RVs, we thought it was going to be a lot easier than it actually was, right? We had a Sandpiper 2018 locked. How different can this be, right? It's a lot different. Every RV is going to be set up a little bit differently, and a lot of the stress that you're going to get from RVing for the first time with a new rig is the not knowing, right? Being unsure of how everything works.
This actually ties in perfectly to the next thing not to do on your first RV trip. Don't assume that just because you're an RVer that you know everything about the new RV. And keep in mind, our old RV was a 2018. Our new RV is a 2020. We're talking about 2 years. We're talking about the same manufacturer. The floor plan has changed,
yes.
But we really expected it to be familiar. We expected this to be easy. I cannot imagine how much change it would have been had it been 10 years apart in RVs or had it been a different manufacturer. I mean, because so much is constantly changing.
Yeah, the technology changes so fast. The leveling system is completely different. This is just 2 years later.
The panel.
The panel, right? Our water panel only has one pull on it now, our galley. It's really important to take the time to familiarize yourself with your rig and how it's going to work, because even if it's the same make and model, if it's not the same year, it's going to be different.
Especially if you've been RVing for decades and then you buy a new RV, there's still a learning curve no matter what, and we made the mistake of assuming we were experts.
Well, I don't know about that.
The other thing that was really different was especially the locations of everything.
Yeah.
That took just more decision fatigue when you're like, oh, where's the scissors? And what would have taken you 10 seconds to find ends up taking you 7.5 minutes, and then you forget what you needed them for in the first place.
Yeah, because one of the things you build confidence is when you have a rig and you start getting to know your rig. You have, you know, a way of doing everything. There's a system you have in place. You know where everything is, right? With a new rig, that whole system is going to be changed. We went from 4 slides to 6 slides. So things like that, everything is going to change. So be ready for that.
Well, and the RV even drove differently, which I didn't drive it. It was all on your shoulders.
Yeah.
But he was saying that it felt different. It turned different. I don't know.
Yeah, the turning radius was a little bit different, and a lot more of the weight is shifted. Being that we have a front kitchen in our new rig, a lot of that weight is sitting right directly over the pin, which is where you want the weight in a fifth wheel, right? You want it over those 4 wheels in the back of my dually. I love that, but it definitely felt a little bit different. The new rig is also about 700 pounds heavier than our last rig, so it definitely drove different.
Even the tanks, the gray tanks, black tanks, all that stuff was different, which comes to our third mistake, what not to do. Don't assume one hose is enough.
Yeah, it really is the biggest mistake I made, right? I assumed that because it was a Sandpiper and I noticed that it had 2 exterior gate valves, that the gray, the galley, and the black was on 1 exterior gate valve, and that my outdoor kitchen was on the other, the second exterior gate valve and it isn't, right? And so on this rig, things are completely swapped. On my waterboard, there's only a pull for the galley tank, right? That's just the galley tank is on 1, the one that's up front. My black, my gray, and my second gray are in the back now. So it took some getting used to that.
So basically, the old RV had 2 connections too, but he was only using one of them because the outdoor kitchen is his man shed. Well, this was set up totally different with the location of the kitchen. He has to use both of them. Yeah. He can't escape having 2 hoses, and this being Christmas, we weren't in a position to buy 2 hoses.
Exactly. So when I wanted to dump my tanks, I needed to literally dump those tanks, remove the hose, and put it over because I did not have a splitter fitting, right, to put 2 hose into it. The other thing that you're going to want to do on your first maiden trip is, if it's a new rig, you want to flush out the system. If these rigs are built in the wintertime, they go ahead and they winterize these systems with an antifreeze throughout the pipes, right? Now, in our case, our unit never left the building, so Forest River didn't have to winterize it, but still, you still want to flush that system out by running quite a bit of fresh water through it before you start drinking it.
There was still air pockets, and you don't want to have those air pockets in the line, so you still have to, you know, put a lot of water through that to get rid of it.
Yeah, and you also want to fill your water heater, right? And you don't want any air in that whatsoever. So you're going to need some time. The other mistake that we made on the first time that we set up with Sandy, which we didn't make this time, was we started setting up right before it got dark, and I didn't have the time to play with it the way that I would have liked to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you can be close to home or close to the dealership, you'll have more time and you don't have to set up for the very first time in the dark.
You don't want to be rushing anything, especially when you're a newbie. You got to have time to go slow. Another really big tip is don't make it harder than it needs to be, especially if you're a newbie, right? Get a pull-through sight. You also want to tell them how long your total rig is, and we're at 65 feet when we're attached.
So even though you're going to learn how to back your rig in, if it's your very first trip and you don't have to, why put yourself through it?
Yep.
Another thing you're going to want to make sure is that you have full hookups, because it takes time to know how long it takes to fill your tanks, and especially things like washing dishes, fill up tanks really, really quickly, showers, make it easier on yourself.
So when we booked our first site, when we bought Sandy back in 2018, we made it very clear to the lady that we called at the office that we were newbies and that we were carrying a 42-foot rig and we had never done this before.
She didn't just give us a pull-through site. She gave us a pull-through site away from anyone and anything that we could possibly hit.
So if you are in transit and you're only stopping over for one night like we were, what you want to do is you want to call ahead and ask for a site that allows you to pull through. And hopefully you can get a site long enough so that you don't have to detach your truck from the fifth wheel. It just makes it a lot easier when you're leaving the next morning to pull into the site. Hopefully they get a fairly level site so you don't even have to drop your landing gear. But typically when we pull into a site like that, even when we're not going to detach, I always take the pressure off the back of the truck with the front landing gear just to give the truck a little bit of a break overnight.
The fifth thing that you should not do is don't underestimate familiarity. And here's what we mean by that. So on our trip, we traveled 1,250 miles up to Indiana, and then we traveled that same amount down to Florida. We stopped at the same locations going north as we did going south. We even had the same exact campsite. So that familiarity of knowing where the location was, where the turn was, and even knowing the site, and him being familiar of just a few days prior having set up at that site, even though it was a totally different RV.
Yes.
It really made a big difference.
We pulled in at 10 o'clock at night. That was the day that Mercedes gave herself food poisoning.
On Christmas.
On Christmas Day, and we needed to pull in, and it took us 12 hours to go 450 miles. The day was brutal. It was brutal. We pulled in late at night, and I was grateful that I had been on that same spot 4 days earlier, because it was a screwed up spot. The water in 50 amp service was about 50 feet away, so I was straddling 2 spots, so I didn't have to detach. Pulling in at 10 o'clock, taking care of Sage, doing all that driving over 12 hours.
Rough.
I was gonzo. I was exhausted. So I was grateful that I was familiar with that area.
Yeah, because we weren't familiar with the RV. We weren't familiar with the location of its contents. At least he was familiar with the site.
Well, I was a little bit more familiar with the RV because it was my second night,
oh my
right?
gosh, it takes time.
It just takes time.
So the next thing not to do on your first RV trip is don't forget the necessities. And I was guilty of this. Our very first trip back in 2018, I didn't bring bed sheets. And so the RV, you know, it has that really pretty comforter that matches the curtains and everything. Well, I didn't realize that RV mattresses are different sizes than regular mattresses. So the bed sheets that I did have did not fit. But having had that experience of that very first trip, you know, I didn't have a meal plan, so we ended up getting fried chicken at Publix in our very first meal. But by our first meal in our new RV, we ended up eating homemade chicken, which was so cool.
We were a little bit better prepared than we were last year.
But that being said, don't overpack.
Yeah, we actually thought we had plenty of room, right? Because we were switching into one 42-foot rig into another 42-foot rig. We removed most of the contents that we didn't think we need on the trip into our clam tent that we left on our site back in Florida. So we thought we had taken enough off that it was fine. There'll be plenty of room to make the swap, right? One rig to the other. That was not the case at all. We were there for almost 8 hours, and we had help with the people at Forest River bringing the contents over. We just didn't know where to put it. We know now that there's a lot less storage on the new rig than there was the old rig. This place is absolutely gorgeous. It's wide open. It's a front kitchen. The living room is beautiful. It's open to each other. But we could not believe how much extra room that second bedroom gave us. Not only in the bedroom, but in the loft above that bedroom. We were able to stack stuff up there. In Sandy, we also had additional storage space under our little bench seats in the kitchen area, right? We used that as an extra pantry. We never thought to take all that stuff out before we had left. So we had 2 massive 2-foot by 4-foot areas just stuffed with all this food, juice, dry goods that needed to go into the new RV.
Yeah, I'm a hoarder, and the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem, and my life is unmanageable. No, but on a serious note, though, you just assume something's bigger because you see the wide openness of it. It is bigger, but you lose all the compartments.
Exactly. Another really important point, and I think the most important point when you're RVing, especially if you're a newbie and it's your first trip, go slow. Don't push anything. Check everything 3-4 times. Now granted, we were up against it, right? It was Christmas Day. Mercedes was dying of food poisoning. At one point she was asking me to call 911 and she was in tears. It was horrible. We started calling local campgrounds to see if we could find a place. It's Christmas Day. Nobody's answering their phone, right? We literally started considering posting to the RV Odd Squad for help. Who is close? Who is in Georgia? Who could help us out? You know, who could come get us or at least bring us stuff? And we didn't go there. Luckily, We said a prayer. Mercedes got exactly what we needed. We had some popsicles in the freezer.
Pedialyte popsicles.
Pedialyte popsicles saved the day. She
Keep
was
them in
so
your RV.
dehydrated.
Oh, yeah.
She had it coming out of every orifice in her body.
I wanted to cleanse, but
she was dying, right?
I was, but I'm tired.
Exhausted?
Well, I'm fatigued. I'm still slightly dehydrated.
Because you food poisoned yourself.
I gave myself
Baby,
food
don't
poisoning.
ever eat your own food.
No, it's that the breakfast burrito was a week old, so that's I will
Bad
never,
idea.
Yeah, I'll never
Alright.
do that again.
So we're on day 8, our final leg, 350 miles. How do you feel, babe?
Great. No. I think the most important reason to go slow, when you're towing an RV, you've just added all that weight. You've just added so many more levels of danger to operating a motor vehicle, right? And so you have to go slow, you have to pay attention, and you have to be, especially when you're driving through big cities, you have to be so aware. So take your time and don't put yourself in that position where you have a date that you absolutely have to hit.
When you're traveling like that or you're learning new things, there's going to be stress. So have patience with each other. Love each other. You know, try to help wherever you can, especially on the day that Mercedes got sick. I was doing
both roles.
All of it. All of it. And I wasn't complaining about it. You know, I felt horrible for her.
Yeah, he obviously felt horrible for me. Look at how he's laughing. He's kind of enjoying it a little bit.
No, I didn't enjoy it at all.
He had to take care of Sage.
It was an 8-hour day that turned into a 12-hour day. So we
Yeah.
added 50% travel time to our trip. It was brutal. It was absolutely brutal.
But I think the lesson here is don't step on your partner's toes, have the division of labor. But that being said, if I double check or if he does a walkthrough inside, don't take it personal. Remember, we're all on the same team.
Yeah, and you know, this is a big deal for me because when we set out RVing 13, 14 months ago now, I took it personally when Mercedes would tell me what to do or double check or say, you left the chalk or you didn't lift the stairs up or is that slide all the way in? I used to take it personal, like, yeah, I know what I'm doing.
It wasn't.
Knowing what I know now, I am so grateful that I have a partner that double checks everything that I do, because one thing we know for sure, every single time we moved, right, we always forgot something. Every single time, even if it was something simple like locking down the fridge, right, one time, or, you know, not locking one of our baggage doors. It seemed that always there was something.
Don't take it personal.
Yeah, and today I'm super grateful that she double checks me. I double check her.
Yeah,
I don't take
me.
it personal. It's always thank you, babe.
And I don't take it personal when he double checks, because he does. I mean, he often finds
Is that
something.
chicken cooked?
Yeah.
Is that burrito old?
We're talking about the RV. Your maiden voyage in your RV can be a lot of fun. It can be memories. It can be fantastic. But if you're not careful, it could also be deadly. In the next video, one of our YouTube students talks about 8 mistakes that she made in her camper crash, and she goes over every single mistake and how to avoid them.
We'd like to introduce you to Liz Amazing, and that's really her name. Enjoy her video.